Today I'd like you to come on a journey with me and with leading demographer Simon Kuestenmacher. First we're going to go back to the 1950s and then forward to today and then even further forward again to 2054. We're going to look at how our cities have changed and what will change even more over a century as Australia's nations transition from a colonial outpost to a cosmopolitan global community. We're going to delve into Simon's latest research, which tells a powerful story about our nation. It reveals the lifestyle preferences of the Australian people and the drivers of demand for residential property, and that's something all property investors need to understand. So, welcome to today's show.
Welcome to the Michael Yardney podcast, where twice each week you will learn a number of new ideas regarding success, property investment and money in around 30 minutes. Our show is brought to you by Metropole, who specialise in helping you grow, protect and pass on your wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. Now here's your host, Michael Yardney, Australia's authority in wealth creation through property, who has been voted one of Australia's top 50 most influential thought leaders.
What will our cities look like in the future? Sure, there's been lots of speculation lately about how we're going to live post-COVID, but I want to take a bigger picture view and look what Australia's largest cities may look like in 40 years' time. Of course, this will be crucial information for anyone interested in property investment or anyone who's in business for that matter. And to help me look in the crystal ball, I'm joined in today's podcast by Simon Kuestenmacher, Director of the Demographics Group and one of Australia's leading demographers. Hi, Simon.
It's great to be back, Michael.
Now, Simon, I know your research departments look back in history to see what Australia's biggest cities were back in 1954. Then they fast forwarded to today to see what's changed amongst those cities, and then they projected what things would look like in future cities in 2054. It'll be interesting to see what's happened and how things have changed by then. But let's get back to the mid-50s. Now, I was already born in that stage at 54. In fact, I came to Australia at the age of 3 in 1956. I know you weren't around then. But what does your research show? What was going on in Australia in 1954?
Well, first and foremost, it was a much smaller country. 9 million people only called Australia home back then. And a much higher share of the population lived outside of the biggest cities. So it was a more rural, more evenly spread out population, which is why lots of the smaller cities were more important in relative terms by then. This is a Kalgoorlie, a Canberra, a Broken Hill. They were actually larger in relative terms back then than they are now. So I guess that's where some of those older cities take their historic importance from.
Well, Simon, if you go back even further to Federation and we lived off the land, there were magnificent buildings built in the Bendigos and the Ballarats and where people lived off the land. Some great old homesteads there, weren't there?
Exactly. And they're still around. We still admire them. We go there as sightseeing locations. So it is really helpful when you store the wealth that you're making in the moment into lasting projects so that people go, look at this. It doesn't need to be quite of the scale of a pyramid like they did in Egypt, but a couple of nice banks, a couple of nice grand hotels, they add to a city for decades on end.
Yes, you're right. I'd forgotten about that. The big hotels, the grand hotels that are still being used today. So back in 54, back to those days, I guess Sydney was still the biggest city, wasn't it? It overtook Melbourne, which at Federation was Australia's largest city.
Yes, correct. So by 54, Sydney already had about 1.8 million people, a little smaller than Perth today. Melbourne set at 1.5 million people. And you already see that those two cities dominated. The next biggest cities, Brisbane and Adelaide, they barely had 500,000 folks in them. So the twofold of the population that was with Australia for a long time. Because, of course, you want population to huddle, to cluster together. And remember that, 70-something years ago or what it was much more expensive to ship goods from A to B. So it is more helpful to only have a smaller number of settlements.
But those second-tier cities, they were active, they were busy, they were manufacturing, Newcastle, Wollongong, Geelong, they were the hubs of industry.
Exactly. And that's the reason why they existed in the first place. Every city needs to have some sort of justification why people actually live there. Today, we have much more lifestyle towns. So don't think we had sizable lifestyle towns in Australia back then. It was more functional. You had towns that people visited over the summers, for a bit of a sea change for a month or so. But overall, this was a more functional Australia. And now we're
I guess there
pushing.
wasn't even TV in those days, so I guess you went to the pub to get entertainment.
Yeah, absolutely. And the evil pubs in Melbourne might have locked you out very early back then.
That's right. I forgot about that. Many people listening to this wouldn't know that the pubs closed at 6 o'clock, and I'm not sure that there was trading on Sundays.
Yeah. And so there's the big cultural, revolution that took place, that we opened up more and more in these kind of things. But so the lay of the land of the old cities, that's of course a thing of the past, because cities developed. First and foremost, Australia grew massively. If you look at cities today, we grew to 25 and a bit, almost 26 million people. So much, much bigger. We now have 5 cities that have more than 1 million residents. The Gold Coast will soon become probably the 6th city that will have 1 million residents. So big, big changes. The general rank of the cities is still the same. Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane as the largest cities. That hasn't changed. But we have new entrants in the top 20s. There is, the small towns change as we need less agricultural towns. Then you have the traditional industry towns. They overtake those agricultural towns. So there is a lot of movement in a couple of decades within the ranks of the lower tiered cities. And the story of this research is that these kind of shifts, they don't magically stop. They will continue into the future. We will see cities rise and fall.
Well, if you look at the numbers on your research, in 1954, there was about 9 million people in Australia, but just over half of them, 5.5 million people in the top 20 cities, and a huge percentage of balance in 3.5 million in the balance of Australia. But it's now changed, hasn't it? And that the majority of us are tending to live in those top 20 cities.
Exactly. It sounds weird when you look at a map of Australia, but we are the most urbanized country in the world. If you disregard city-states like Monaco or Singapore, we need only very few agricultural towns, to be quite honest, because we get our agriculture done so extremely efficient. Otherwise, you just have in each state, you have one major city surrounded by a couple of satellite cities, and that's where most of the population lives. Sure, there are smaller settlements outside of this, but they don't fill up. We've now seen with the pandemic a trend of more people moving into lifestyle towns, lifestyle locations, but they all tend to be within, let's call it a 2-hour drive of a major city, because people still want to be connected at least somewhat to the hub that is the capital city.
Okay, Simon, now the fun part. What did your research show was going to happen to Australian cities if we fast forward to 2054? What are Australia's largest cities going to look like then?
Well, the ranks of the top 6 haven't changed. So we still have Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, Perth, Adelaide, Gold Coast as the top cities. But interestingly, and it sounds quite shocking when you think about this, Melbourne will inch close to 9 million people. Sydney as well. Brisbane will be at over 4 million people. Perth at 3.5 or thereabouts. Adelaide didn't crack the 2 million people, but the Gold Coast reached over 1 million people as well. So this is a huge increase in the population. And we kind of have to deal with those projections and kind of have to distribute population forecast for the country across cities. And then the question remains, where are we putting those people? Is this forecast correct that they will all live in Melbourne, or will we see an even higher share of those people move to a Geelong, for example, because they offer cheaper housing?
Well, just to make it clear, Melbourne is going to overtake Sydney on these projections and long before 2054. That will be interesting. Sydney's very much more geographically bound, though, isn't it, by mountains and by the forests and the water. Melbourne can spread out a bit wider. Not that I'm sure that's a good thing to do.
No, it's not a judgment of whether this is a good or a bad thing, but Melbourne has quite a few. It's almost a perfectly flat city. There is a bit of the Dandenongs that stops growth over there. There is, well, we can't grow into the water, so we can't do this. But you see, particularly eastwards and westwards and northwards, there is a lot of growth corridors, and we're already seeing them fill up. And growth obviously tends to go into greenfield development sites because they're just easy to develop fast. And the main story here is for our big cities, not only does population growth occur, but it occurs at a high rate, at a rate of well over 100,000 people per year for Melbourne and Sydney. That means these cities need to do all they can to provide housing fast and at scale.
So for people interested in property and for business people, there are some huge opportunities if you know where the demand is going to be and what sort of properties are going to be in continuous strong demand moving forward. Now, let's make it clear, Australian government has got a business plan. It actually wants to increase our population. It recognises it needs more taxpayers, and we can talk a bit about that a bit further on. So it's not just pie in the sky projections. So over the next 33 years to 2054, Australia's population is likely to rise to at least 38 million. That's a net extra 12 million. So half our population again. It took us 200 odd years to get to where we are now from when Captain Cook came. Now it's 50% increase in that short period of time. Simon, I guess most of those are going to come from overseas rather than natural population growth.
Absolutely correctly. So in traditional terms, meaning the last 10 years or so, we say that about 2/3 of population growth comes from overseas migration, and the remaining third comes from what's called natural increase, more babies than deaths per year. But overall, we will very much be a migration nation. Australia will, in its biggest cities by 2054, there will be more than half of the population will have a parent that has a migrant background, or they themselves are migrants. It's the way that we are going. And so you better prepare for this by making sure that your product offerings, whether you're in housing, whether you're in business in general, that you cater to the full range of the population.
Well, a net extra 3 million people in Melbourne and in Sydney, that's going to mean huge developments, huge town planning issues because of the NIMBYs and, not in my backyard, and the notes not over there either, because most people are going to want to, if they've got a choice, live in the established areas already.
Absolutely. So you have those continued fights going on. If you talk about 3 million people in about 20 years, this is about 1 million plus residences that we need to build. That's huge. Of course, property will benefit in the long run if you are in such a crazy growth market. And, I'm always happy to be challenged on those projections, because people could say, well, will Australia not become a undesirable place for people to move to? At the moment, we assume that we can get the migrants in that we want as a country. Russia, for example, would want migration as well because they're an aging country, but nobody wants to move to Russia. So there's that. And I would argue that people will continue to want to move to Australia because we are an extremely livable country. We are a country that offers a safe democracy. We have safe cities. If housing becomes too unaffordable, that draws back the attractiveness of us. So we don't want housing to become too unaffordable, but we also want to maintain all those attractive levers so that people actually build housing because they see it as a nice investment as well.
Now, in Australia, people make fun of Melbourne having been locked down for 260 days and saying, look what COVID did to us. But I think if people look at us from overseas, they're going to say, hey, that's one of the few countries or cities of 5 million people that actually managed to get COVID under control and moved on. Our economy is doing well. We're needing more people. And the government clearly needs more tax-paying people as well, rather than young people who take up the taxpayers' dollars to go to school, or older people who take up the taxpayer dollars to keep in the healthcare system.
Absolutely. And so this trend will continue, that you want to subsidize or supplement your population with migrants. So we keep the motivation to get them in, and those people will want to come to Australia. So no major shifts would be expected there.
Now, we talk about infrastructure, and when we say that, I guess most people think about the cars and the road and the travel to work, but there's actually a lot more than that, isn't there, Simon? There's the social infrastructure. Where we're going to put the schools for those 3 million people who are going to still be at family formation age and want kids. All the schools a lot of the old schools were closed down. Where are we going to put the hospitals, the childcare centres? Lots to think about.
Exactly. These questions will stay with us forever because population age. And so you have an old suburb that was the family suburb of yesteryear that is now aging. So all of a sudden you have pointless schools clustered around an aging population. So you need to repurpose, rebuild, bulldoze those schools. And then you need to put new schools into the areas where the young families now live. So this transformation of social infrastructure continues in waves as we age and grow old. So that doesn't change. The one worrying factor when we talk about population growth in Australia, where we really do need to be innovative, is water. The more people we have on the country, the worse a drought would be, because the water rationing would become more severe. So I am therefore always happy when I see big water management solutions come online, when innovation in even the more expensive solutions like desalination plants, when they move forward, so that we can ensure that even in extreme weather scenarios, climate change scenarios, that we can ensure we have enough water for everyone. But that said, when I talk to water engineers, they say it can all be done. It's nothing easy, it's nothing cheap, but overall we can do it.
But we need the money, Simon, to spend on that.
Exactly. So it comes at a cost, but the good news is that the population growth that we create in Australia actually creates wealth. Because, as you mentioned, we take in migrants usually when they're 18 to 39. So that means we get their expensive first 18 years of their education for free from overseas. Some other country paid for this. A rather ingenious, evil scheme that we're running here.
Clever scheme.
Very much so. And as soon as those migrants come to Australia, they start paying tax, which is wonderful. And
better scheme.
Exactly. And because we run a skilled migration program, it means we tend to import migrants with reasonably high incomes. And those folks will definitely put enough money aside in the long run that they can pay for their own retirement through the superannuation scheme. So that's another great benefit of migration.
Okay, so putting all this together, what big lessons can you take from this research, Simon?
The first lesson is almost a bit spiritual. Things are always in flux. Things always change. You must not take the status quo as a given. Things will change. So you need to be able to adjust where growth is happening. If towns like Newcastle blow out and get much bigger, the opportunities that occur in secondary industrial towns are endless. So you need to be aware of these things. You want to have these things on the radar, and I want towns to, of course, not see this as something that is written in stone. You need to create the positive future for yourself, and you need to make sure that you have enough infrastructure in place that people can actually enjoy the amenities of your town.
I guess if you say it that way, things are going to change. If we look at what has driven the change in the past, in the 50s where we started this research, it was wool or agriculture. In the 60s, it was manufacturing, but that's now disappeared. So it'll be interesting to see the powerful forces moving forward. I assume it's going to be a level of skilled workers and knowledge workers, because artificial intelligence and robotics is probably going to take over a lot of the unskilled and manual jobs, Simon.
Correct. And if we say, well, where do all those skilled knowledge workers tend to live? They traditionally tend to live in cities because they benefit from clustering together. So therefore, we would see the big cities benefit. We would see Australia operate in a system of global city networks. So in the global city research, we don't think about countries, we just think about cities that are connected with each other. And we will definitely have two members of our cities in the global city network sit as supreme hubs. These are Melbourne and Sydney. And Brisbane will become a minor global city, and Perth is essentially somewhat a secondary, tertiary global city that plays a role in the mining sector mostly. So that thing will probably not change too much. So I don't expect Perth to vastly diversify its economic base. That would probably more happen in Brisbane, Sydney, and Melbourne, whereas Perth would retain the crown as the mining king of Australia.
Another lesson I take from all this is Australia's got good prospects ahead, not just for our economy, but for property, for investment, for lifestyle. It's going to be a destination where more of us are going to want to live. We're very lucky to live in the best country in the world.
Amen to that. And to put even more global context behind this positive attitude towards migration is something we should foster right now at the moment where migrants are still willing to come to Australia. The world will start to shrink by 2060, and probably as soon as 2030, any country in the world will pay migrants good money to enter their shores.
That's an interesting thought. Yes, I read that China's population is going to start shrinking in 20 years' time or so, but I'd never thought about it before. But in the old days, we used to pay people to come and encourage them to come to Australia when we weren't as popular.
And the world will do this again. And China is a great example for a country. The most optimistic research that I'm aware of says China is shrinking by 2027. So this is 5 years away. And I'm speaking to lots of demographers that say China is already shrinking. And by 2050, 2060 or thereabouts, China would be half its size. It's a rapidly aging country. So therefore, just as a geopolitical aside, betting on China as the world's global superpower, it's a fool's errand. China will become the Asian superpower. It will be a regional might rather than the global might. There's no plausible scenario of China overtaking the US in the long run.
Interesting. I hadn't thought of that. I guess the other lesson is that we are still going to be very much driven by global events, even though we're trying to bring more things back home. We are still a small player in the big world economy. Even though we're punching well above our weight, what are we now, the 12th or the 11th biggest economy?
So before COVID, we were the 13th largest economy. But now that Russia is playing up, we will, by the end of the year, definitely be the 12th largest economy. And we only are home to 25 million people. And that's, of course, partially because of our export structure. We export mining and we are a small country, but somehow we were granted the rights to manage a whole continent. So we got a lot of stuff to dig out of the ground and to sell to the world.
Okay. I think another lesson from all this is you may as well expect change. Nothing's going to remain the same. And therefore, you've got to be agile.
Yes, and the good news is, if you think about Gen Z, the folks that are born in the 18 years following the new millennium, these Gen Zs went through COVID in their formative years. You and I, we were a bit annoyed by the lockdowns, and we might have, suffered a bit of emotional pain or whatever. But the Gen Zs
might have.
That's right. But the Gen Zs, those young fellas and gals, they went through the pandemic in their formative years. They have flexibility, change. They have this built in, they have this ironed into their brains now. This will stick with them. So they are well placed to be the future managers of change that is coming at Australia. So I'm quite optimistic about them, to be honest.
So in summary, take a long-term view. Look back, learn lessons from the past, but then look to the future. And whichever way you look at it, Australia's going to keep growing. We're going to need more accommodation, more property, more infrastructure. But then, Simon, all the services that go with that to keep our economy ticking over.
Oh, absolutely. So all those services that are linked to the sheer number of people in a country, they will boom beautifully over the next 30 odd years. So you can always invest into healthcare that will boom. There will be kids that will buy school uniforms and cricket bats. All of this will overall continue to be a growth market.
So interesting. We started by looking back. Now we've looked forward to the future. And I guess that's a good way to end. We can look forward to the future, Simon, because we are living in the best country in the world. And even though some would disagree, I still think we're in the best time in history.
We're definitely living in the best time of history. Just from a sheer medical perspective, you wouldn't want to have lived through a pandemic without so many people being vaccinated, without vaccines coming online so quickly. And whenever you cut yourself open, there are always great doctors around that will stitch you up. So that is great news.
Thank you for your time, and it's fascinating to look at your research. Catch up again soon, Simon.
Catch you soon.
In a moment, I'm going to be sharing my popular mindset message with you. But just following on with my chat with Simon, you can see that it's really critical to understand demographics and how they're going to change, but importantly, how they're going to affect markets. And that's part of the detailed research we do at Metropole to help our clients outperform the averages. So if you're thinking about adding to your property portfolio, and even if you're thinking about buying a home, if you're like most home buyers, your current home, your new home is not going to be your forever home, so you really should be thinking about it like an investor. So if you're thinking about adding to your portfolio or buying a home, why not get the team at Metropole and our research behind you? Because the world is changing in front of our eyes. The property markets are going to be very, very different moving forward. But we're doing the hard yards to get the information to find out where markets are going to outperform, not just in the short term. That's not as valuable as in the long term. We're committed to helping you using the frameworks that I have developed and the strategies I've built over 5 decades and that we've been helping clients with for over 20 years. In fact, our audited results show that Metropole's clients are 7.3 times more likely to own 6 or more properties than the average property investor. So why not book your complimentary, obligation-free chat with one of my team? Go to metropole.com.au, find out about what we do, and I don't know which of our services would suit you, but my team will have a chat because we have wealth advisory, property management, buyer's agency, financial planning, property strategy, business advisory. But for almost everybody, it starts by putting a plan together, bringing your future into the present and planning for you to become the person you plan to become. And then we'll help you implement that plan. So if you're wanting to grow your wealth through property, go to metropole.com.au. I'd love to be part of your wealth creation journey.
Now here's Michael's mindset message. Remember, a change in your thinking will lead to a change in your life.
In today's mindset session, I'm going to talk to you about the top 5 financial mindset mistakes many people are making. I'm sure by now you recognise I've mentored thousands of people over the last 12, 15 years or so, and I've recognised some common habits that I'd like to share with you. I've also recognised that becoming financially free is about your habits. It's not about getting lucky at the casino one night or some spectacular financial investment that went your way. It's about making good decisions day in, day out, and continuing to make those decisions over a long period of time until eventually they become a habit. And once you commit to becoming financially free, once you commit to becoming wealthy, you see it as a lifelong way of behaving, of thinking, rather than something you just manage to pull off. This means following a few rules on what we allow ourselves to think and dwell upon will get you pointing in the right direction. Now, of course, these differ from person to person, depending upon what your strengths are, your weaknesses are, but each of us should be guided by a few ideas of how we stay on track. Now, on this list could be things that you're going to do every day, like go to the gym, like learn something new, like listen to this podcast, but there should also be things on the list that you don't do. Now, what could they be? Well, they usually start with mindsets. There are a handful of mindsets that people adopt that take up a lot of their time and energy and stop them achieving their dreams, stop them even chasing their dreams. It holds them back. It stops people achieving wealth. So if you can avoid adopting any of the following common 5 mindsets I'm going to share with you, you're already going to be ahead of the game. And the first one is relying on a wage to get wealthy. Now, don't get me wrong. A wage is extremely important, but that's the mindset a lot of people have. Oh, my boss will take care of me, the government will take care of me, the pension will take care of me. Sure, having a wage, a salary will give you a roof over your head, food on the table. I'm not dismissing that, but you won't get ahead. You won't truly get ahead by working for somebody else. Think of all those tech entrepreneurs who've made billions of dollars in recent years. They're all innovators. They work for themselves. Now, you don't necessarily need to be an entrepreneur either. of course, you can still work for somebody in a 9-to-5 job and on the side build a property investment business, a true business that will one day replace your personal exertion income. One thing's for certain, you need to drop the wage mindset and think like a business person or an entrepreneur. But boy, property business is a fun business to be in. The second mindset you should avoid is thinking investing is too hard. Look, nothing in life comes easy, but you don't need to have worked in finance for 40 years to make good investment decisions. Yeah, you need good advisors, you need to work hard, you need to be resilient, you need to be focused, but don't be fooled when people tell you it's too hard to invest. That's simply a cop-out that they're telling themselves. You see, everything that is easy today was once hard. The third mindset I want you to avoid is thinking money just causes problems. Now, why would anyone think that, you're saying? But boy, are there people out there. It's a big one for many people. There are people out there who think this. They've had a setback and they walk away from investing altogether. They decide, it's not worth it. Money's just not made for them. What they don't understand is that money's for everybody. And it's just what money represents to them that's the problem. Their own failure. But failure's a good thing. And money's nothing to fear or to be intimidated by. It's merely a means to an end. It's merely a way of just setting yourself financially free. That's where you want to head, isn't it? So there's nothing wrong with chasing that, is there? The fourth of the 5 mindsets I want to talk about now is thinking you don't deserve it. It's interesting how often this comes up. It's a subconscious thing. It's not a conscious thing. People won't tell you outright that they think they don't deserve to make money, but they'll show you that they think this way in many other ways. They self-sabotage themselves by blowing their money, by not committing to saving, by not chasing their dreams. They don't prioritize wealth because deep down they think it'll never happen to them. They think like a poor person who's always going to be poor rather than a person who's on their way to achieving wealth. Half the battle in becoming rich is giving yourself permission to become wealthy. And the 5th mindset you've got to avoid is that of being afraid of making a mistake. Now, this is a big one for many, many people. Mistakes aren't a bad thing. Look, no one likes making them, and we tend to fear them. We tend to fear making them. But for some people, it debilitates them. They're so afraid of messing up, they'd rather not even try. Now, how sad is that? After all, this isn't a dress rehearsal and we only have one chance in life to do what we really want to do. And it is what it is. Mistakes are part of life. And the more you aim for, the more mistakes you're going to make. But the only true failure in life is never letting yourself make a mistake. So don't compare your successes or your failures with anybody else. It's just too easy to do that today with Facebook and Instagram, and you see everybody's highlight reels. You don't see the bits on the cutting room floor, the mistakes. In particular, don't compare your chapter 1 with somebody else's chapter 12. Can you see how damaging the above 5 mindsets can be, the ones I just discussed? And yet they're very, very common. So ask yourself, have you ever fallen into one of these mindsets? If you have, I bet it's held you back. The good news is there's always time to change them. You see, money doesn't discriminate. It doesn't care who owns it. So why not have your share? Well, thanks for spending the last half an hour or so with me and with Simon Kuestenmacher. And you can see why I delve into demographics, because it's one of the main factors that are going to drive our property markets moving forward. And it's critical for all property investors, business people and entrepreneurs to understand. So if you got some benefit from today's show and you know someone else who will benefit from it, please tell them about the Michael Yardney podcast. By the way, in every podcast app, there's a little button down the bottom somewhere which allows you just to share it. Tell somebody about it, or tell them in the old-fashioned way. Or, of course, you can tell the world by leaving a review. We always love getting those as well. So I'll be back again real soon, but you can catch me in between these shows on social media. Just look for Michael Yardney, or why not join my private Facebook group? Go to Facebook and look for the Property Update private Facebook group, where every day I leave some charts, some information, something you won't get elsewhere that'll help you in your journey as a property investor. I've got a bonus for you just for listening to this show. So go to podcastbonus.com.au, leave us your details, and you can get a bundle of new ebooks and reports. I've updated a couple of those reports recently too. As I said, I'll be back again real soon. Have a great week. Make it a great week.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Michael Yardney podcast, which was brought to you by Metropole, who help their clients grow, protect, and pass on their wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. If you like what you heard and don't already subscribe, you'll find us on iTunes or on your favourite Android app as the Michael Yardney podcast. Watch out for our next show, which comes to you twice a week, and you'll learn some new ideas about property investment, success, and money in around 30 minutes. To get more of Michael's thoughts, go across to www.propertyupdate.com.au and sign up for his daily morning briefing, and you'll hear from not only Michael but a group of leading property success and money experts. And just a reminder that the information you heard in this show today is general educational advice and not specific investment advice, as we don't know your personal circumstances. If you're looking for specific advice, why not ask the team at Metropole to help you?